Dust rolled off the open plain as Harlan pushed open the door of his weathered ranch house. The hinges creaked, same as they had every morning for years, and the same silence met him on the other side. The kind of silence that didn't just sit still, it pressed. Harlan stood in it like a man chest deep in still water, stuck, unable to move forward or back. 41 years old, sun-bitten, wiry, and quiet by habit, he hadn't spoken more than a handful of words in days. There just wasn't anybody to talk to anymore. The ranch was out past Blanco Springs, too far from town for regular company, and too quiet for someone who once dreamed of something fuller. He used to think marriage would change that, kids running through the fields, a woman waiting by the door. But his wife had died 5 years ago from a fever that took her in less than a week. They'd never had children. She couldn't. And after, Harlan never looked too hard for anyone else. Just kept the ranch running out of duty, not want. He knew cattle, fences, and dust, but people? He'd grown too stiff inside for that. That morning, with the sky already too hot for spring, Harlan saddled his horse and headed into town. He didn't need anything in particular, but the stillness of his land had grown sharp in his chest. Sometimes he rode into Blanco Springs just to hear noise, boots on floorboards, glass clinking in saloons, folks calling to each other without meaning much. It reminded him the world was still turning. The saloon was half full when he walked in. A couple ranch hands were playing cards at a corner table, laughter sharp with whiskey. Harlan ordered coffee. He didn't drink much anymore, and sat by the window, watching the street. It might have been just another uneventful day if Jesse Crowley hadn't walked in, drunk and dragging his bad leg like it was made of iron. Jesse was known in town, not because he was liked, but because he made trouble wherever he went. He drank too much, gambled too hard, and owed half the town money he'd never pay back. But today he had something different with him. A girl, skinny, dirt on her dress, hair like tangled straw, face too pale and hollow to be anything but scared. 10, maybe 11 years old, and holding tight to a canvas sack that looked like it had everything she owned in the world. Jesse yanked her forward like she was nothing more than a dog on a rope. "She ain't mine," he slurred to anyone listening. "Wife's sister died in Kansas. I ain't got no use for a kid." Harlan looked away, but only for a second. The girl met his eyes across the room, just once. Long enough for him to see she was trying not to cry. Long enough for something to snap loose in his chest, like a gate finally giving after years of pressure. Jesse dropped into the poker game without another word. Harlan watched as the girl stood off to the side, forgotten. Her arms hugged that sack like it was life itself. She didn't talk, didn't sit, just stared at the floor like she was willing herself to disappear. Cards flipped. Money changed hands. Jesse lost again and again, cursing louder each time. He started wagering things nobody believed he'd deliver. Horses he didn't own, land that wasn't his. Then he said it. "I'll throw the girl in. Hell, she's more trouble than she's worth anyway." The saloon got real quiet. One man chuckled. Another spat. But nobody stopped him, not even the dealer. Harlan stood before he even realized he meant to. Walked over. Voice low. "I'll take her." Jesse blinked, confused. "You want the damn kid?" "I'll take her," Harlan said again. "You can fold. Keep your pride. Or lose and give her to someone else who don't give a damn." Jesse looked at the pile of coins in the center of the table. His lip curled, torn between pride and desperation. Finally, he pushed his hand away. "Take her then. Ain't no blood of mine." The girl didn't move. Didn't believe it. Harlan walked to her, knelt slow so he didn't scare her off. "You got a name?" She shook her head, eyes wide, jaw clenched like she didn't dare speak. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said gently. "But you don't gotta come if you don't want." Still nothing. But after a long second, she reached out her thin hand and put it in his. Just like that. Like all her choices were used up, and this was the only door left open. Back at the ranch, she didn't say a word all day. Harlan gave her a blanket, a clean shirt, a bowl of stew. She ate like someone afraid the food would disappear, then curled up by the fireplace and fell asleep fast, too fast for a kid who wasn't running from something. That night, Harlan sat on the porch, listening to the wind. He couldn't figure what he'd just done. He wasn't ready for a child, didn't know how to talk to one, much less raise her. But there was something about her, something in the way she'd looked at him that made it clear she'd known worse than anything he could imagine. Next morning, she was up before him, sweeping the floor with more effort than skill. He poured 2 cups of coffee, one mostly milk, and slid it across the table. She stared at it. Then, soft and rough for not being used, she said, "I'm Rosalind." Harlan nodded. Rosalind's a good name. She didn't speak much after that, but something changed between them. A thread pulled tight. He gave her space, but watched out of the corner of his eye. She moved like a child used to being hit, quick, careful, and never too close. Harlan made sure she had shoes, food, a bed, but more than that, he gave her silence she didn't have to be afraid of. Over the next few weeks, she began to walk the fences with him, feed the chickens, even ride the old mare that barely trotted anymore. She never smiled, but she looked up more. One afternoon, while fixing the fence line, she asked out of nowhere, "You're going to send me back?" Harlan didn't answer right away. He set down the hammer, leaned on his knee. "You want to go back?" "No," she said so fast it was almost a whisper. "Then you stay," he replied simply. "Far as I'm concerned, this is home." That night she cried, real quiet, under the quilt in the next room. Harlan heard it, but didn't go in. He just sat there, eyes on the ceiling, fists clenched. He didn't know who had hurt her or what she'd seen, but the way she flinched from sudden sounds told him enough. One morning, Rosalind didn't come down for breakfast. Harlan knocked. No answer. He found her curled in the corner of her room, eyes wide with fear, her little hands trembling. There'd been a thunderstorm the night before. Harlan didn't say anything, just sat down nearby. After a while, she crawled toward him, still quiet, and leaned her head against his arm. "You ain't got to talk about it," he said. "Not till you're ready." That small gesture, just a resting there, meant more than anything spoken. In that moment, Harlan knew the ranch would never be quiet again in the same way. And for the first time in years, he was glad. But things don't stay simple. Not out here. A week later, the sheriff came riding up. Harlan met him on the porch. Sheriff Bixby was a good man, but the look on his face wasn't good news. "Jesse Crowley's dead," he said. "Knife in the ribs. Found him outside a gambling tent north of San Felipe." Harlan didn't react much. Jesse had been heading that way for years. "Thing is," Bixby added, "someone told the authorities Jesse had a girl with him before he died. Now, they're looking into it. Might be family back east. Might be someone trying to stir up trouble." Harlan's jaw clenched. "She's safe here. I know that. You know that. But that don't always count for much with lawmen from somewhere else." That night, Harlan sat Rosalind down and told her someone might come asking questions, that he'd protect her, that nothing would happen without going through him first. She looked him in the eye for the first time, really looked. "You promise?" "I promise," he said. And from that day on, she started calling him Pa. Rosalind kept close to Harlan in the months that followed, like a colt still too unsure to stray from its shelter. She never asked for anything, never complained. Harlan noticed the way she'd wait for him by the barn each morning, pretending to be sweeping or feeding the chickens, just to make sure he was still there. Every evening, she'd perch on the porch rail while he read the same book aloud he'd been reading for years, an old Western adventure novel with yellowed pages and a missing cover. She never asked about the ending. Maybe she didn't want to know. Harlan had never meant to raise a child. He wasn't the soft kind. But the more time passed, the more he began to change in ways he didn't even notice. He stopped cursing under his breath when tools broke. He started cooking real meals instead of living off jerky and beans. He made a chair for her beside his at the dinner table. He even fixed the broken piano in the parlor, though neither of them played. Maybe just having it not broken anymore felt like progress. Still, there were shadows Harlan couldn't shake. He'd started having dreams again, bad ones. Not about Jesse or the poker game, but about the woman he lost, the quiet ache of what never happened. His wife, Helen, had been the only person who could read through his silence. She had a laugh like a breeze through cottonwood trees, light, unexpected. The memory of her still lived in the corners of the house, in the brush of a curtain or the way the light hit the window at dusk. Harlan didn't talk about her, not even to Rosalind, but she hovered in his mind, especially now, when he was trying to build something new out of what was left. Rosalind brought things back to life just by existing. That's what surprised him the most. One day, while riding into Blanco Springs for supplies, Harlan stopped at the dry goods store run by Grace Mallory. Grace was young for a widow, not yet 30, with soft eyes and a mind that didn't miss much. Her husband had died in a cattle stampede 2 winters ago, and she'd run the store by herself ever since. Efficient, polite, but with a wall up, just like Harlan. He was used to people nodding and moving on. But Grace wasn't like most folks. That day, when Rosalind wandered over to the candy jars, Grace leaned across the counter and said, "She yours?" Harlan hesitated. Sort of. Grace didn't press, just smiled gently. She's got good eyes. Steady. Rosalind picked a peppermint stick from the jar and held it like she wasn't sure it was really for her. "Put on my tab," Harlan said. Grace nodded, but her eyes lingered on him a second too long. He nodded back. "Thank you, ma'am." When they left, Rosalind looked up at him and said, "She likes you." Harlan frowned. "What makes you think that?" "She watched you like you were going to say something funny, even though you didn't." I got a dry chuckle out of him. "I'm not real good at funny." "I know," Rosalind said seriously, "but I think you could be." Their days rolled forward. Spring turned to summer. The ranch, quiet and lonely for so long, began to look lived in again. Rosalind had a room full of books she barely read, but lined up neatly on her shelf. Harlan built her a small desk with his own hands, and though the corners were uneven, Rosalind sat at it every evening and drew. She wasn't very good, but Harlan kept every page. Then came the stranger. It was near dusk when the rider showed up. Slim man in a dark coat, slick black hair tied at the nape. His horse was too fine for a drifter. Harlan saw him before he reached the front porch and stepped out with a rifle slung casual across his shoulder. "Can I help you?" The man reined in. "Looking for a girl. 10 years old. Dirty blonde hair. Name of Rosalind." Harlan's heart dropped straight to his boots. He kept his tone level. "Why? Family's looking for her. Said she went missing out of Kansas. Reward involved." "She's not missing," Harlan said, his voice flat. "She was abandoned." The man's eyes were like polished stones. "That ain't how her uncle told it." Harlan didn't flinch. "She's not going anywhere." The man tilted his head, considering. "Didn't say I was here to take her. Just here to find her. I'll be in town if you change your mind." He rode off, slow and smooth. Harlan stood on the porch long after the dust settled. Inside, Rosalind watched from the parlor, eyes wide. She didn't ask questions, just sat down on the piano bench, fingers pressed to the keys like maybe if she made a sound, it would break the fear. Harlan closed the door, locked it. "You're safe," he said, but even he didn't quite believe it. The next few days were heavy with silence again. Harlan couldn't stop thinking about the stranger, about the so-called uncle, about what kind of man let a girl be wagered in a poker game and then came back around months later claiming rights. He visited the sheriff the next day. Bixby leaned back in his chair, hat-tipped. He's a bounty finder. Calls himself Cyril Brandt. Rides on behalf of folks with coin. Says some man named Dalton Connors claims to be the girl's legal uncle. Never heard of him. Well, he's got papers. Might be forged, might not. Says he's got a sister who died and left Rosalind behind. That makes him next of kin. Harlan's jaw tightened. That girl don't want to go back. Bixby sighed. Doesn't matter what she wants. Not on paper. What if the man who left her here is connected to Connors? Then it's complicated, Bixby said carefully. But Connors isn't Jesse, and Jesse's dead. Harlan left the office without saying another word. He didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every creak of the house sounded like someone come and take her. He sat by her door with a rifle across his lap, just like he had during the hardest days of cattle rustling years ago. Rosalind never woke, or if she did, she didn't let on. The next morning, she found him there. "Did you watch all night?" she asked, her voice small. He nodded. She crouched beside him, hugging her knees. "If they take me back, I'll run away. Even if it's far. Even if I die trying." Harlan looked at her, and something broke loose in him. Not just fear, grief. Grief for the life she'd already lived, the years she'd never get back, and the quiet pain that sat behind her every word. "You're mine now," he said, "and I don't care what some paper says. I'm not letting you go." That night, they sat on the porch together again. The stars stretched high above, the way they always did, cold, distant, but steady. Rosalind leaned her head against his arm. "You think that woman, the one at the store, would come visit?" Harlan raised a brow. "Grace." She nodded. "She might." She looked kind. "I think you could use kind." Harlan didn't answer, but the next time he rode into town, he stopped at the dry goods store again. Grace looked up, and this time she smiled with her whole face. "You're back." He nodded. "Got a girl now. Seems like I need more soap and pencils." Grace started gathering supplies. "And maybe a friend or two." He met her eyes. "Maybe." As he stepped out of the store, he looked back once. Grace was watching, but not in a curious way. In a way that said she saw the man behind the silence. Harlan tipped his hat, something he hadn't done in years. Back at the ranch, Rosalind met him at the gate, her hair braided, face hopeful. "You talked to her?" "Yep." "She gonna come?" "Maybe," Harlan said. "Maybe not right away." Rosalind nodded, like she understood. Then she handed him a drawing, her best one yet. It was the two of them standing in front of the barn, the dog by their feet, stars above. "You can hang it if you want," she said shyly. He didn't say a word, but later that night, he nailed it to the wall by the dinner table. And for the first time since she arrived, Rosalind smiled without fear. The days passed in slow rhythm, the kind Harlan had grown used to after years alone, but now each one carried new weight. Rosalind was changing, not in big, sudden ways, but in the kind that made Harlan pause in the doorway and just watch her for a moment longer. She was still quiet, still cautious, but the fear was softening, melting off her shoulders little by little. She'd begun humming while brushing the horse down in the mornings. It wasn't much, just a wandering tune without words, but it was something alive. Some mornings, Harlan would hear it as he came down the steps and stop short at the sound. She'd catch him looking and stop, blushing and pretending like it never happened. He never said anything. He didn't need to. She was healing, and he knew better than to ask it to go faster than it wanted to. In the evenings, Rosalind took to sitting cross-legged on the floor near the fire, sketching in a new notebook Harlan had bought her. She drew the things she didn't know how to say. The outline of their barn, the old mare's crooked ears, the dinner table with 2 chairs. Sometimes Harlan. Once, Helen's portrait from the mantel. "You didn't know her," he said softly the night she showed him. Rosalind shrugged. "You talk like someone who still misses her." He nodded, unsure what else to offer. "She must have been good," Rosalind said, and that was it. That was enough. They had their own rhythm now, and it felt like it might just hold. But Harlan could feel the rope tightening from outside. Knew the man from Kansas hadn't left for good. Cyril Brandt, smooth-talking, paper-carrying, and likely working for someone who had no right to claim a child they never once came for. And then there was Grace. At first, Harlan only saw her when he needed things. More pencils, new boots for Rosalind, canned peaches, but slowly he found other reasons. The store's porch had started to feel like a resting place, not just for his boots, but for his voice. Grace had a way of waiting for the silence instead of trying to fill it. That made her easy to talk to. One warm afternoon, he tied his horse outside the store and stepped in to find Grace brushing dust off the front shelves. "I was starting to think you got lost," she said, smiling without looking up. "Just busy. Fence posts don't dig themselves." She set the broom aside and leaned on the counter. "How's Rosalind?" "Drawing up a storm. She's got a whole notebook of pictures now." Grace's smile widened. She's got your jawline, you know? People in town are starting to think she's yours. Harlan blinked. She is. I mean by blood. He shook his head. Blood isn't what matters. Grace nodded slowly. No, it isn't. He hesitated, then pulled something from his coat pocket. A folded drawing. One Rosalind had made at the general store, sketched in soft pencil, complete with a crooked front step. She drew this for you, he said. Said it makes her feel safe. Grace took it carefully, like it might break. Her eyes softened. That girl's going to change the world one day. She already changed mine, Harlan admitted. Grace looked at him a long second. Then she said quietly, You ever think about letting someone in again? He didn't answer right away. He couldn't. But when he left that day, he kept glancing at the drawing of the store she now had taped to her wall. Rosalind had drawn the doors wide open. That night, he found Rosalind asleep at the table with pencil smudges on her cheek. He lifted her carefully, tucked her in, and sat by her bed a while, listening to her breathe. But peace has a way of drawing eyes. The first sign that things were shifting came quietly. A telegram. Sheriff Bixby brought it out to the ranch himself, hat in hand, looking uneasy. Brant's still in town, he said. Sent a wire to someone back east. Might be the man claiming kin. Harlan took the paper. Read it. A name was mentioned, Dalton Connors, and a judge in Kansas who'd agreed to review the matter. They're trying to get jurisdiction, Bixby added. If they do, they'll come with court orders. She don't want to go, Harlan said. I know that, and you know that. But law don't bend easy for feelings. Harlan looked out at the pasture, where Rosalind was walking the fence line, counting wildflowers between her fingers. She was thrown away, he said quietly. Left like garbage. Bixby didn't argue. Just be ready. You may need to fight this in court. And I mean real court. Not here. Back east. Harlan clenched his jaw. He hadn't left Blanco Springs in years, hadn't even thought about lawyers or judges since his wife died. But for Rosalind, he would. He'd ride all the way to Kansas barefoot, if that's what it took. When he told her, that night over stew, she didn't cry. She just listened. Will they make me go? I won't let them, Harlan said. She stared at her bowl. What if they say you're not enough? Harlan reached across the table and took her small, shaking hand. Then I'll make them see I am. She nodded, but her grip tightened. In the days that followed, the house grew tenser. Rosalind stopped humming, started waking up with nightmares again. Once, Harlan found her outside before dawn, sitting by the barn with her arms wrapped tight around her knees. Do I have to testify? She asked without looking up. He knelt beside her. Maybe. I'll be right there. She didn't answer, just leaned her head on his shoulder and sat there a long while. It was Grace who brought the idea forward. I have a cousin in Wichita. She's a lawyer. Not the high-powered kind, but she's smart. She might take this on. Harlan was stunned. Why would she help me? Because Rosalind's not a case. She's a child. And because you're not just some rancher. You're the man who showed up every week to buy more pencils for a girl who draws her way through trauma. Harlan didn't argue. That evening, he and Rosalind wrote a letter together, explaining everything in their own words. I don't know how to end it, Rosalind whispered, pencil hovering. Just tell her the truth, Harlan said. So Rosalind wrote, in her shaky, careful print. I don't remember anyone ever wanting me until Harlan. I don't want to go back. I want to stay here where it's safe. They mailed the letter the next morning, then waited. During that time, Harlan and Rosalind stuck close. They rebuilt the chicken coop, repainted the front porch, planted tomatoes behind the house. Every little project became a fortress, a way to fight back against the idea that someone could come in and take it all away. One evening, Harlan came back from the fields to find Rosalind sitting on the piano bench again. But this time, she was playing. Not well, just single notes, slowly, but playing. Her face was focused, her fingers uncertain, but something in it broke Harlan open. Where'd you learn that? He asked softly. I don't know, she said. It just came. He sat beside her. Sounds like hope. She smiled at him then. Small, fragile, but real. A week later, Grace rode out to the ranch, dust trailing behind her in the sunset. She had a letter in her hand, creased and stained from travel. "She's taking the case," Grace said, handing it over. Said she read Rosalind's words and cried. Said it's one of the clearest custody arguments she's seen. Harlan read it 3 times. "She wants to meet you both. Says we might need to get ahead of this." "I'll take her tomorrow," Harlan said, his throat thick. Grace hesitated, then stepped closer. "You don't have to do this alone." He met her eyes. "I know." She touched his arm. "Harlan, I don't say things I don't mean. I've been on my own a long time, and I've learned not to chase what don't belong to me. But this feels like something worth fighting for." He didn't say anything, but when she turned to go, he followed her out to her horse, then said, quietly, "I'd like it if you came with us." "To Wichita?" Grace blinked, then nodded. So they packed. Rosalind folded her drawings into a small case. Harlan found Helen's old travel bag and filled it with clothes and supplies. Grace arranged things in town, spoke to Bixby, tied up loose ends. The night before they left, Rosalind stood on the porch looking out at the pasture. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Yeah," Harlan admitted. "But that doesn't change what needs doing." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with something stronger than fear. "Thank you for not folding when you could have." "I don't fold when it matters," he said. Then, for the first time, she wrapped her arms around his middle and hugged him hard. Harlan froze for a second. Then he bent down and hugged her back, firm and warm and steady. And under the stars that night, with the wind brushing the fields and the house behind them full of memory, Harlan understood something that had taken him years to see. Family wasn't born. It was chosen, and he had chosen her. The road to Wichita was long, flat, and dry, stretching out ahead of them like a trail they hadn't quite earned a right to follow. Harlan rode beside the wagon most of the time, letting Grace hold the reins while Rosalind sat between them, quiet as ever. The girl kept her eyes on the horizon, her little fingers tight around the strap of her case. Inside were her drawings, the letters she wrote, and a small photograph Harlan had found in an old drawer. Helen, smiling in the sun, arms crossed, wind in her hair. Rosalind didn't say much, but she tucked the photo inside her case like it was a promise. They arrived in Wichita on a Monday morning, sun already high and blinding. Harlan had never liked cities. Too many people moving too fast, too much noise that meant nothing. But the moment Rosalind stepped down from the wagon and took his hand without needing to be asked, he remembered why he was there. He wasn't the same man who once preferred silence over people. He wasn't just a rancher anymore. He was a father now, and fathers didn't run when things got hard. Grace's cousin, Martha Langley, met them outside the courthouse. Short, sharp-eyed, and dressed in a plain navy skirt with ink smudges on her sleeves, she wasted no time. "You Harlan?" "Yes, ma'am." "You don't talk much, do you?" "No, ma'am." She glanced down at Rosalind, who stood behind Harlan like a shadow. "You must be Rosalind." Rosalind nodded once, her face unreadable. Martha crouched to her eye level. "I read your letter. I've been doing this work for 12 years. I've seen a lot of stories. Yours stayed with me." Rosalind didn't speak, but her hand slipped into Harlan's, and Martha smiled softly before standing. "We don't have much time," Martha said. "The Connors petition already went through an initial review. The judge wants to hear both sides. We have 3 days." Harlan's jaw tightened. "That's not much." "No, it's not. But we've got something they don't." "What's that?" "The truth." In her. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Martha asked questions, sharp, fast, relentless. Harlan stumbled over some of them. What year did Jesse Crowley arrive in Blanco Springs? Did Harlan ever hear him mention Dalton Connors before the poker game? Had Rosalind ever been formally enrolled in school? She was abandoned, Harlan kept saying. None of this was planned. "I know," Martha replied, "but courts don't care much for stories unless they come with numbers, signatures, and order." Grace helped keep Rosalind calm, while Martha worked Harlan through the testimony he'd be giving. At one point, Rosalind wandered over and whispered to Grace, "I think I'm making him nervous." Grace laughed gently. "I think he'd jump through fire for you right now." The first sign of trouble came that evening, when Martha returned from the courthouse with her lips pressed tight. "They're pushing the hearing up. Tomorrow morning. Dalton Connors has money, and money has a way of moving things faster." "What does that mean for us?" Harlan asked. "It means he'll be ready to play dirty. And we don't have time for second chances." That night, Rosalind couldn't sleep. Harlan found her sitting by the window in the boarding house room, knees pulled to her chest. "What if they believe him?" she asked without turning around. He sat beside her. "They'll hear the truth. Sometimes people don't care about that." Harlan stared out the window with her. The city lights flickered in the dark. "When you showed up on my porch, you didn't know me. But you stayed. That means something. I stayed because you didn't ask me to go." Harlan looked at her. "And I won't now." She leaned against his arm. "I'm not scared of him. I'm scared of going back to feeling invisible." "You're not invisible anymore." They sat there a long time in silence, until sleep finally found her. He carried her to bed and sat up through the night, listening to the city breathe like a restless animal outside their window. The courtroom was colder than it needed to be. Wooden benches, pale light, everything too quiet. Connors arrived in a fine gray suit, gold watch chain glittering across his chest. His lawyer stood beside him, a slick man with oiled hair and a permanent smirk. Harlan wanted to knock the expression clean off his face. When Rosalind entered, hand in his, the room turned. Connors looked at her like one might look at a misplaced item. No warmth, no recognition, just interest. His lips curled slightly, and Harlan felt a growl rise in his chest. But Martha touched his arm, firm, steady. They called Harlan to speak first. He stood at the front, rough boots against polished floor, and told them everything. About the poker game, about Jesse, about how Rosalind had been passed off like junk nobody wanted, about how she hadn't just come to live with him. She'd started to live again. He spoke in plain words, no flowery phrases, just the truth. And he saw some of the jury shift in their seats when he said, "That girl didn't need saving. She needed choosing, and I chose her." Then came Connors. He claimed to be Rosalind's blood uncle, said his sister had been too poor to keep Rosalind, and Jesse had taken her in temporarily. Said Harlan had no right to raise someone he hadn't legally adopted. Said Rosalind was better off with stability and structure, not some lonely cowboy on a failing ranch. Harlan's fists clenched. Grace had to whisper to him, "Don't rise to it." The court called Rosalind to the stand. She walked slowly, her chin high but shoulders trembling. Harlan felt his breath leave his body. "What's your name?" the judge asked. "Rosalind." "And do you know who that man is?" He pointed at Connors. Rosalind looked at him. "No." "Have you ever lived with him?" "No." "Do you know who Mr. Harlan is?" She nodded. "He's my pa." A murmur rose in the courtroom. The judge quieted it with one sharp look. "Has he ever hurt you?" "No." "Has he cared for you?" "Yes." "Do you want to live with him?" "Yes." "Why?" She hesitated. Then, "Because he's the first person who saw me." The room went still, completely still. Even the smirk fell from Connors' lawyer's face. The judge leaned back in his chair. "Thank you, Rosalind." They recessed for deliberation. An hour passed, then another. Harlan paced the hall like a man headed for a fight. Grace sat beside Rosalind on the bench, holding her hand. Finally, the doors reopened. The judge read the ruling aloud, his voice echoing down to every nerve in Harlan's spine. Custody is awarded to Harlan. Harlan closed his eyes. Rosalind let out a tiny breath, then turned to bury her face in Grace's shoulder. When Harlan opened his arms, she launched into them, clinging hard. They left the courthouse in silence. The sun had shifted, golden warm. Harlan held Rosalind's hand as they walked back to the wagon. Grace followed beside them, a hand on Harlan's back for the first time. But it wasn't over. As they loaded up, Connors approached them outside, alone. "You think you won something?" he sneered. "You think this ends here?" Harlan stood firm. "You lost." Connors smiled. but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'll be watching. You're not out of reach." Harlan stepped closer. "You already let her fall once. Try again, and I'll be ready." Connors didn't reply, just turned and walked off, his shoulders stiff, hatred simmering in his steps. That night, back at the boarding house, Harlan sat beside Rosalind while she drew again. "What are you working on now?" he asked. She turned the page toward him. It was a drawing of them. Not at the courthouse, not in fear, but on the ranch under the open sky. The house was behind them, light glowing in the windows. Harlan was fixing a fence. Rosalind was riding the old mare. Grace was there too, standing on the porch. "You put her in it," Harlan said softly. Rosalind nodded. "She's part of it now." Harlan didn't answer, just pulled her into a gentle hug, one hand on the back of her head. Later that night, he sat with Grace out on the steps, stars overhead. "You're quiet," she said. "A lot in my head. I figured. But you did it." "No," he said. "We did." Grace smiled, then leaned her head on his shoulder. For the first time, Harlan didn't flinch, didn't freeze. He let it happen, let the weight of another person rest against him without fear. Inside, Rosalind slept, hand curled around that photo of Helen. On the floor beside her bed, her drawings were spread out like roots of a life beginning again. And out on the steps, Harlan looked out at the night and felt something he hadn't known he could still feel. Home, not just a place, but a life built from choosing one another, no matter what. The ride back to Blanco Springs was quiet. Not the kind of silence that used to haunt Harlan, but the kind that came with weight, like both he and Rosalind were carrying something heavy and sacred between them. They didn't speak much, just rode side by side, each lost in thought. Grace followed behind in the wagon, her presence like a steady heartbeat just out of sight. But even with the court victory behind them, Harlan couldn't relax. He kept glancing over his shoulder, kept an eye on the road ahead. Cyril Brandt was gone. Dalton Connors had been put in his place. But the threat he left behind, the threat of being seen as not enough, of the law reaching in and pulling apart what they'd built, still clung to Harlan like smoke. Rosalind seemed calm on the outside, but Harlan knew she wasn't finished healing, and neither was he. It was late afternoon by the time they returned to the ranch. Rosalind jumped from the wagon before the horses had even stopped. She ran toward the front porch, then slowed and turned, as if making sure it was all real. "This is home," she said aloud, softly, just to hear it again. Harlan didn't reply. He just walked to the porch steps and stood beside her. She looked up, and he saw something in her face that hadn't been there before. Resolve. But that night, the wind changed. The sky turned dark too early. Thunder rolled in over the plains, distant but low and steady like drums. Grace decided to stay in the bunkhouse rather than head back to town. Rosalind didn't say anything about the storm. She tried to act fine, but Harlan could see it. How her fingers curled around the spoon at dinner. How her eyes flicked toward the windows with each flash of light. He was putting away dishes when he heard it. The sound of a drawer slamming upstairs. Then a muffled sob. He didn't run, just walked up the stairs, slow and steady, like approaching a spooked animal. Rosalind sat in the corner of her room again, same place he'd found her all those weeks ago, arms wrapped around her knees. "I don't want to be scared anymore," she said. Harlan crouched in front of her. "It's okay to be scared." "No, it's not." She snapped, the words sharp and fast. "He looked at me like I was a thing, and nobody said anything until you. He doesn't get to own that part of you anymore. I still feel it." Harlan sat beside her, knees bent, back against the wall. "So do I." She looked at him. "I still feel the day I buried Helen," he said. "Still hear the silence of this house after she was gone. There were nights I sat right here, thinking the walls were going to cave in, that maybe I'd go with him and nobody would notice." She didn't speak, but she leaned into him. "I thought I was done with life." Harlan continued, voice quiet. "Then you showed up, covered in dust and silence, and you scared the hell out of me." Rosalind blinked, startled. "I scared you. More than any storm," he admitted. "Because suddenly I had something to lose again. They sat like that while the thunder rumbled and the rain pelted the windows. When lightning cracked, Rosalind flinched, but she didn't pull away. "Do you think they'll come back?" she whispered. Harlan didn't lie. "Maybe, but they won't get through me." She nodded slowly, then crawled into his lap like a much younger child and pressed her face against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her and held her until her shaking stopped. Downstairs, Grace was stoking the fire. She looked up as Harlan came down with Rosalind half asleep in his arms. He didn't say anything, just sat down on the couch with the girl still clinging to him. Grace sat across from them, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "She's got more fight in her than most grown men," she said. Harlan looked into the fire. "And more reason to." "Harlan," Grace hesitated. "What's going to happen when she gets older? When the questions start coming, the real ones." "They already came." "No, I mean about her parents. What Jesse was to her. What kind of people left her behind." He swallowed hard. "I'll tell her the truth, but not all at once. Not until she's ready. She might never be ready. Then she won't need it." Grace studied him for a long moment. "You ever think about talking to someone about all this?" "I'm talking to you. I mean really talk. Not just survive it." Harlan shook his head. "I've spent most of my life keeping my mouth shut. Silence is easier. Maybe, but it's not safer." She stood, walked over, and gently brushed a lock of hair from Rosalind's face. "You love her. I didn't know I could, not again. You've already built her a home, Harlan. Don't forget to build one for yourself." The next day, the storm passed. The fields glistened. The earth was soft again, breathing. Harlan took Rosalind out to the pasture after breakfast. The mare was grazing near the fence line. "You remember how you used to be scared to ride?" he asked. Rosalind nodded. "Then one day you just did it. Not because you weren't scared anymore, but because you decided to try anyway." He handed her the reins. "Think you can take her on your own today?" She bit her lip. "Maybe." Harlan nodded. "That's all I ask." She mounted slow and a little crooked, but when she turned the mare toward the far field and kicked gently, the horse started into a smooth trot. Harlan watched her go, watched her ride without looking back. He'd never been more afraid, and never more proud. Later, while he was fixing the back gate, he heard a voice behind him. "You think you're free now?" He turned fast, rifle in hand. Cyril Brandt stood at the fence, arms crossed, boots dusty. "You're trespassing. I'm delivering a message." Harlan didn't move. "You're done here." "Connors isn't," Brandt replied. "You think he gives up just because a judge said so? He's got friends, money. He'll bury you in paperwork and threats until something breaks." "I don't scare easy." Brandt gave a tight smile. "Not asking you to be scared. Just asking how long you think you can hold on." Harlan stepped forward. Longer than him. Brandt looked past him toward the house. "That girl ain't just some orphan anymore. She's the thing keeping you breathing, which makes her the only way to make you bleed." Harlan's grip tightened on the rifle. "You come near her again," he said, "and I swear to God, you won't leave here whole." Brandt's smile vanished. "You think this ends with words?" "It doesn't. It ends with someone losing." Harlan raised the rifle. "Then start running." Brandt hesitated, saw the steel in Harlan's eyes, and turned without another word. Harlan didn't lower the gun until the man was just a dot on the horizon. That evening, Grace found Harlan out by the barn, hammering boards harder than necessary. "Brandt was here, wasn't he?" Harlan nodded. "What did he want?" "To shake me. Remind me that this ain't over." Grace stepped beside him. "And did it work?" "No." She looked up at him. "Why not?" Harlan set the hammer down. "Because I already lived through the worst day of my life. I buried my wife in frozen ground and came home to silence. Nothing that man says can break what I already survived." Grace placed a hand on his chest. "But love can." He looked at her. "That's what's different now," she said. "You've got something to lose again." He nodded. "That's what makes it worth it." Inside, Rosalind was at the piano again, playing notes that barely held together, but somehow still sounded like a future. And outside, Harlan stood with Grace, the sky wide above them, the storm behind, and the road ahead theirs to defend. Spring returned slower than usual that year. as if the land itself needed time to breathe again. The grass came in soft patches, green climbing across the pasture in no hurry. Harlan noticed the birds first, robins pecking near the fence posts, their little heads twitching at every sound. The world was waking up, and so were they. Rosalind planted marigolds out front without telling anyone. She'd taken a shine to the dusty, stubborn flowers after reading somewhere that they could survive anything. Harlan found her kneeling in the soil one morning, dirt on her cheeks, her small hands patting the ground firm. "Why marigolds?" he asked. "They look like fire," she said, "but they don't burn." He knelt beside her, ran a calloused finger through the fresh earth. "That's a good reason. It wasn't just the flowers. Rosalind was changing every day, laughing more, drawing less. She still carried quiet in her bones, but now it had space for joy." Harlan caught her singing once, just a line or two of something she was making up. She didn't know he was listening, and he didn't let her know. Some things were better left untouched. The biggest change, though, came on a Wednesday evening. Harlan came in from the field to find Rosalind waiting at the table with a folded piece of paper in her hands. "I want to change my name," she said. Harlan froze. "I mean, not who I am, just the part that people call." He sat down slowly. "What name?" She unfolded the paper. It was a drawing, her and Harlan standing side by side. Underneath, she had written, "Rosalind Harlan." Harlan didn't speak for a long time. He read the name again and again until it didn't feel like a dream. "You sure?" he asked, voice low. She nodded. "It's the one I want." Harlan reached across the table and took her hand. "Then it's yours." A week later, they signed the papers with Martha's help. The court made it official, but the moment it felt real was later that night when Harlan called her name across the yard. "Rosalind Harlan, time to eat." She turned and smiled like she'd been waiting her whole life to hear it. Grace was there for dinner, like she was most nights now. She brought cornbread and a bottle of wine Harlan never touched, but kept on the table because she liked the way it looked. She fit quietly and completely like she'd always belonged. Rosalind called her Grace still, but once, just once, Harlan had heard her whisper "Mama" in her sleep. He didn't bring it up. He didn't need to. That night, after Rosalind had gone to bed and the fire was just embers, Harlan and Grace stood on the porch watching the stars come out. "You ever think about marrying again?" she asked softly. Harlan didn't answer right away. He looked out at the sky, thought of Helen, thought of the silence that had once ruled this place. And he looked at Grace. "I think about what home feels like now," he said, "and I think maybe I already did." She smiled, stepped closer, slipped her hand into his. Out in the field, the marigolds caught the moonlight just enough to glow. And inside the house, under a quilt she picked herself, Rosalind Harlan slept with a steady breath and a heart that finally knew it was safe. They hadn't undone the past. They hadn't erased the pain. But they had chosen each other again and again until the choice became a life. And that was enough.